At my mom's funeral, my uncle stood up and said she deserved to die alone. My cousin added, no one loved her anyway. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at them, my hands clenched around the folded tissue in my lap. Every word felt like a slap across the face, not just to me, but to her memory. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. No one said anything, not the pastor, not the rest of the family. It was like everyone agreed, or at least decided to stay quiet. Then the door at the back of the room opened. A man in a dark green military uniform walked in. Tall, quiet, maybe late 30s. He didn't look at anyone. He walked straight toward the casket. His boots echoed on the floor, one step after another. He paused in front of my mother's body, removed his cap, and looked down at her. Then he said, I owe her everything. The room went dead silent. No one knew who he was. Not me, not my uncle, not even the pastor. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about my mother and about the people who claimed to know her best began to change. Let me take you back a few days before the funeral. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of peaceful silence people talk about in movies, but the empty kind. The kind that wraps around you like a wet blanket and makes you feel heavier just for existing. I sat at my mother's kitchen table, the same one where she used to write grocery lists on old receipts. Her chipped coffee mug still sat by the sink. Her scarf was still draped over the chair like she might come back and grab it any second. But she wasn't coming back. My name is Jessa Calloway. I'm 33 years old, and my mom, Lenora Calloway, was the most complicated woman I've ever known. To some people, she was just a cautionary tale, a what not to be whispered behind closed doors. But to me, she was strength in human form. Flawed, yes. Messy, absolutely. But she had a heart that never stopped giving, even when the world gave her nothing back. Planning her funeral was like trying to organize a goodbye for someone who never got a proper hello. No one offered help. My phone stayed silent. No cousins calling. No casseroles at the door. Just me, sitting with the funeral director, trying to answer questions like, was there a church she belonged to? And should we expect a crowd? I wanted to say, she didn't go to church. Church judged her. And no, I wasn't expecting a crowd. In fact, I was expecting a fight. My Uncle Barrett had already made his feelings known. He hadn't spoken to my mother in over a decade. He blamed her for things no one dared to speak of directly. Her reckless years, the way she brought shame to the family after the divorce, after the debt, after everything. His son, my cousin Milo, was worse. He took his father's bitterness and wore it like armor. I should have been bracing myself for what they were going to say at the funeral. I should have known better. But part of me hoped they would at least be quiet. Just for one day. The funeral was held in a small room in Ridgemont Memorial, the kind of place that smelled like old wood and potpourri. There were maybe a dozen people scattered across the pews, some coworkers from the grocery store where she used to work night shifts, one or two neighbors, and a woman I didn't recognize who sat in the back and cried quietly the whole time. I wore my mother's silver locket. She used to tell me it was a gift from someone she once loved. She never said who. I remember asking once, and she said, some stories don't start until after you're gone. I didn't understand it then. I still don't fully. The pastor read a short prayer. He had never met her. I could tell by the way he said her name like it was just another line in his script. There was no warmth in his voice, no sense of who she really was. It stung, but I stayed still. This day wasn't about me. Then Barrett stood up. No one asked him to speak. He didn't even look at me as he rose from his seat and walked slowly to the front. I felt my stomach turn. He adjusted the microphone like he had something profound to say. Instead, he looked around the room, sneered, and said, let's not pretend she was someone she wasn't. Lenora chose her path, and she paid the price. She pushed everyone away. She died alone because that's what she earned. A couple of gasps echoed through the room. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My jaw locked, but my hands were shaking. Then Milo, arms crossed and smirking, added from his seat, no one loved her anyway. No one told him to shut up. No one interrupted. The pastor just shifted awkwardly and said nothing. I looked around. People lowered their eyes. Some whispered. No one defended her. No one stood for her. I felt something deep inside me crack open, anger, grief, shame, and a fierce kind of love that made my throat burn. But just as I pushed my chair back, ready to speak, the back door opened, and that's when he walked in. He didn't belong there. That was my first thought. The man who entered through the back door wore a sharply pressed army dress uniform. He looked mid to late 30s, clean-shaven, serious eyes, built like someone who had seen hard things and lived to carry them. He didn't glance around the room. He didn't hesitate. He just walked, one steady step at a time, toward my mother's casket. Barrett turned to look at him, clearly confused. Milo furrowed his brow. They didn't know him. Neither did I. He reached the casket, took off his hat, and stood for a moment in silence. Then he whispered something under his breath, words I couldn't catch, and placed his hand gently on the edge of the coffin like he was greeting an old friend. Then he said it. "I owe her everything." Those words didn't land like a statement. They landed like a stone dropped into still water. Everyone froze. The woman crying in the back stopped mid-sob. The pastor looked stunned. Even Barrett didn't speak. The man turned slowly to face us, and his voice carried, not loud but clear. "I know none of you know me, but I knew Lenora Calloway. Better than most, I think. She saved my life." He looked straight at me. "You must be her daughter." I nodded slowly, still trying to understand what was happening. Barrett muttered under his breath, "Saved his life?" "Yeah, right." The man turned toward him. "You don't have to believe me, but I'm going to tell you anyway." He took a breath. 20 years ago, I was 17 and living on the street. My parents had both died, I had no siblings, and I aged out of foster care with no direction, no money, no clue what came next. It was November. Cold. I was sleeping behind the dumpster behind a grocery store off 3rd and Ridge. One night, a woman came out the back door with a trash bag. She saw me. She didn't scream. She didn't call the cops. She asked if I was hungry. He paused, eyes scanning the room. "That woman was your sister, your aunt, your mother. She gave me leftover soup and a warm blanket from her car. And the next night, she came back. And the next? For 3 months, she made sure I had something warm to eat and something dry to sleep under." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom had never told me any of this. Not once. The man continued. "She never asked for anything. She didn't give speeches. She didn't make me feel like a project. She treated me like a human being. When I told her I wanted to join the army, she looked me in the eye and said, 'Then you better stop sleeping behind dumpsters and start standing up straight.' And she gave me a bus ticket to the recruiting office." Milo leaned toward his dad, whispering something with a smirk. Barrett looked uncomfortable, but he didn't interrupt. The man ignored them. "I went on to serve 3 tours. I built a career. I have a family. I mentor at-risk youth now. I've spent the last decade helping kids who were just like me, and every time I help someone, it's because of her." He looked back at the casket. "She may not have been loved by all of you, but she was loved by me, respected by me. And I know I'm not the only one. She left a mark. You just never looked close enough to see it." I felt tears running down my face, and for the first time that day, they weren't just from grief. Barrett stood trying to reclaim control. "You don't know what she did to this family." The man stepped closer. "Maybe not, but I know what she did for me, and I think in the end that counts for something." Barrett sat down, jaw tight. Milo folded his arms and turned away. I looked around the room again. People weren't whispering anymore. They were listening. Faces softened. A few nodded. The woman in the back wiped her eyes. My mother, the woman they all dismissed and disregarded, had just been resurrected in front of them. Not as a disgrace, not as a failure, but as a savior. Quiet, unthanked, and unforgettable. I stood up and faced the room. That was my mom, all of her, and I won't let her be remembered as anything less. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with meaning. And in that silence, the conflict didn't just burn. It transformed. I barely remember sitting back down. My hands were still trembling, and my pulse was racing like I'd run a marathon without moving a single inch. That man, Anthony Vega, had just torn open everything I thought was settled. My mother's reputation, my family's version of her story, my silence. All of it was cracked wide open. For so long, I had let them define her. I let them twist her life into something small and shameful. I let them decide that because she struggled, because she didn't smile at church socials or host perfect Thanksgivings, she didn't matter. But now I knew better. I felt it in my chest. She mattered. She mattered to someone. And that went at the world. After the funeral ended, the room thinned out quickly. Coworkers offered soft condolences, eyes a little wider than before. Milo stormed out with barely a word. Barrett stayed back, standing stiff near the door, looking like he wanted to say something, but never quite finding the courage. I didn't care. What mattered was Anthony. He waited near the casket, quiet and respectful, like he wasn't ready to leave her either. I walked up to him, still feeling unsteady but determined. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He nodded. "Of course." "Why did you come today?" Anthony took a deep breath. "Because for 20 years I promised myself I'd find a way to thank her. But she moved, changed numbers. I couldn't track her down. I only found out she passed 2 days ago. Someone from the store posted about it online. I drove all night to get here." "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said without hesitation. "People like her. They don't get statues. They don't get headlines. But they should get remembered right." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you for what you said, for everything." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me something, an old, faded photograph. It showed my mother, much younger, standing beside a skinny teenage boy with a buzz cut. They were outside a diner. She had her arm around his shoulder, and she was laughing. "I've kept this in my wallet since the day she gave me that bus ticket," he said. "She told me to take a picture so I'd remember I wasn't invisible." I pressed the photo to my chest. "She never told me about you, about any of this. She didn't like talking about herself. She only talked about you." That was the moment it all snapped into focus. My mother wasn't ashamed of her past. She just didn't want it to burden me. She carried it all alone so I could walk lighter. And here I was, letting people like Barrett drag her memory through the dirt. Not anymore. I went home that night and sat at her desk. It was cluttered with scraps. Old receipts, clipped recipes, handwritten notes in the margins of torn envelopes. And beneath all that, I found a notebook. Inside, she'd been writing letters. To me. Some were half-finished. Some were rambling. But one page caught my eye. The ink was darker, the handwriting steadier. It read, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope I made you proud. I know I wasn't always easy to love, but I tried. God, I tried. Not just for me, for you. I didn't want you to become me. But maybe now I realize there's nothing wrong with being someone who fights hard and loves quiet." I broke down right there. And when I got up, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let her story die in that cold, judgmental room. I wasn't going to let the loudest voices rewrite her life just because they shouted over the quiet truth. I pulled out my laptop and started writing. First a journal entry, then a post, then a letter to the local paper. I talked about the woman who took in strangers, the woman who worked 2 jobs and still came home to make soup, the woman who taught me to be kind even when no one was watching. I didn't care if anyone else believed it. I knew the truth now. And I was going to make sure the world knew it too. Because if my mother could change someone's entire life with a blanket and a warm meal, then the least I could do was change how the world remembered her, starting with her name. Lenora Calloway, a woman who saved lives without needing to be seen. A few days after the funeral, I got a message from Anthony. It was short, just a sentence and an address. "You should see this. She never stopped helping." I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to stay in the warmth of the memories I had just uncovered. Just me, my mom, and the pages of her quiet strength. But curiosity tugged at me. If there was more to her story, I had to know it. The address led me to a community center about an hour outside of town. It wasn't fancy. The paint on the sign was chipped, and the front steps creaked under my feet. Inside, the walls were covered in artwork, paintings and poems, some childish, others raw and emotional, the kind of art that comes from people who've lived through storms. A woman greeted me at the front desk. "You must be Jessa." I blinked. "Yes. How did you know?" She smiled. "We were expecting you. Anthony said you might come. Follow me." She led me down a hallway and into a small room lined with bookshelves, mismatched chairs, and a bulletin board covered in Polaroids. On the far wall, there was a framed photo of my mother. It took my breath away. She was younger, mid-40s maybe, wearing a denim jacket and holding a tray of cupcakes. Around her were 3 kids smiling up at her like she'd hung the moon. The caption beneath it read, "Miss Lenny, our anchor." I turned to the woman beside me. "She volunteered here." She nodded. "More than that, she saved this place. We were on the verge of closing. No funding, barely any staff. Your mother showed up one afternoon and asked if we needed help. She cleaned. She cooked. She ran after-school tutoring. She taught writing workshops to teenagers who wouldn't speak to anyone else. She never asked for credit. She just showed up." I felt the tears coming before I could stop them. She never told me. She didn't do it to be remembered. She did it because she knew what it felt like to be invisible. I walked over to the bulletin board and stared at the photos. In each one, she looked happy. Not just smiling, but truly at peace. Her eyes, which so often looked tired when she came home at night, sparkled in these pictures. There were handwritten notes, too. One said, "Miss Lenny taught me how to write my first story." Another, "When I wanted to drop out, she told me my voice mattered." I believed her. I traced my fingers along the edges of the board, absorbing every word like oxygen. She hadn't been the woman my family claimed she was. Not even close. She hadn't lived a small life. She'd lived a hidden one filled with quiet power, with small acts that rippled into big changes. For years, I had carried her story as one of tragedy, but now I saw it for what it really was, a story of survival, of sacrifice, of love that didn't need applause to matter. Anthony met me outside when I left. He leaned against his truck, hands in his pockets, watching the sky darken. "She came here every Thursday," he said, "rain or shine." "I didn't know this version of her," I said. He nodded. "Most people didn't, but it's not too late to tell that story." And that's when I knew what I had to do. I went home, pulled up the draft of the post I had started after the funeral, and rewrote the entire thing. This time, it wasn't about defending her. It was about celebrating her. I included the picture from the center, the notes from the kids, Anthony's words, and even a few pages from her notebook. I told the full story of a woman the world discarded, who refused to discard anyone else. When I hit publish, I didn't expect much, but within hours it spread. People shared it, commented, told their own stories, strangers who had met her at the shelter, kids she'd mentored, former coworkers who remembered how she always brought extra food for the new hires who couldn't afford lunch. One comment read, "I never knew her name, but she gave me a blanket when I was 13 and sleeping under a bridge. Thank you for reminding me who she was." Another said, "She was a quiet hero. Thank you for making her loud." And that's when I realized my mom hadn't needed the world to see her. She just needed one person to finally tell the truth. That was going to be me. It's been 3 months since the funeral. I still can't drive past Ridgemont Memorial without feeling a pang in my chest. But now, it's not just grief that shows up. It's pride, gratitude. A strange, soft ache that reminds me my mother mattered. Not just to me, but to people she saved, to lives she touched, to a community that knew her not as a cautionary tale, but as a quiet constant in the chaos of their world. Since I published the post, something unexpected happened. The story didn't just resonate, it moved. It reached places I never imagined it would. A local reporter called me. Then a national blog picked it up. And suddenly, Lenora Calloway, my mother, was no longer a footnote. She was a feature, a name spoken with reverence, not ridicule. One of the kids from the community center, well, not a kid anymore, she's 24 now, reached out to me. Her name is Danny. She told me my mom helped her stay in school when her family life fell apart. She had nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a lot of anger. But my mom saw something in her. She didn't try to fix me, Danny said. She just listened. And when I failed a class, she told me failing wasn't the end unless I stayed there. Danny's in her final year of college now, studying to be a social worker. Because of my mother. There were others, too. A woman who had been in and out of shelters most of her 20s said my mom gave her a pair of boots one winter and sat with her while she cried. A former coworker remembered how she used to write little notes of encouragement and leave them in the break room. Quotes about strength, survival, and getting back up. And then there was the letter. One I found tucked inside the last book she had been reading. It was addressed to me. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just a plain envelope with my name scrawled in her uneven handwriting. Inside, she wrote, "If you ever wonder what I was trying to do with this life, the answer is simple. I wanted to give back what I never got. I wanted to prove that being broken didn't mean being useless, and if even one person remembers me as someone who made things feel a little less heavy, then I'll call that a win." I read that letter every week, sometimes out loud, sometimes silently with my hand pressed against the paper like it might still be warm from her touch. My relationship with my family didn't magically heal. Barrett hasn't spoken to me since the funeral. Milo sent me a message, short and half-hearted, saying I was dramatic and making a saint out of someone who screwed up. But I don't need their approval anymore. I used to think defending my mother meant convincing them she was better than they claimed. Now I know better. It's not about them at all. It's about the truth. And the truth is that my mother was human. She struggled. She made hard choices. But through it all, she chose kindness. She chose to lift others up even when she was sinking. She chose to keep loving even when it hurt. And maybe the world didn't applaud her for it. Maybe most of it never even noticed. But I see it now. All of it. Every long shift. Every warm blanket. Every act of love she never expected credit for. I started a scholarship in her name, the Lenora Calloway Quiet Light Fund, for students who grew up in shelters or foster care, who need someone to believe in them. I figured if she could give so much with so little, then maybe I could use my voice to carry her light forward. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head, tired, soft, always honest. Just be kind, baby girl, even if no one sees it, especially then. That's who she was. And if I ever have a daughter, I'll tell her the same thing. I'll tell her about Lenora Calloway, not as the woman my family gave up on, but as the woman who never gave up on others, as the woman who saved lives with soup, with words, with silence, with stubborn hope. She didn't die alone. She died remembered. And more importantly, she died having made the world better, one unseen miracle at a time. And that, I think, is the most beautiful kind of legacy a person can leave behind. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone who gave quietly and loved deeply without ever asking for anything in return, then do one thing today. Remember them. Speak their name. Tell their story. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like my mother's, stories of unseen kindness, silent strength, and redemption in the most unexpected places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Tell me about the quiet heroes in your life, the ones who changed everything without asking to be noticed. I read every word, and I respond when I can. And if you're new here, or if this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel. I share real stories that dig deep into what it means to love, to lose, and to live with purpose. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping Lenora Calloway's story alive.